Welcome to the best decks in the Pokemon TCG in August 2025. Beginning with our first honorable mention of the video, we have Ethan's Typhlosion. And you'll see in today's video, I'm going to have 3 different rankings for each deck. So I have personally ranked Ethan's as the 13th best deck in standard format, but according to the popularity in online tournaments, it is the 7th most popular. And according to how many top 8s every deck archetype has gotten, Ethan's is ranked 8th in number of top 8s. So follow along as we go through these archetypes. There's going to be 3 different rankings for each. So Ethan's Typhlosion is going to be a single prize focused deck, with Ethan's Typhlosion as your main attacker, with that Buddy Blast attack going all the way up to 280 damage if you have 4 Ethan's Adventures in the deck, and even higher with something like Brave Bangle, bringing that up to 310, the Victini with Victory Cheer, bringing that up to 320, and also Gravity Mountain, not exactly a damage buff, but it makes Stage 2 Pokemon have 30 less HP, so it can be easier to knock out Stage 2 Pokemon that way. Although Ethan's does have the Ethan's Quilava with Bonded by the Journey as a little bit of an engine for searching out your Ethan's Adventure, that's going to be supplemented with a 1/1 line of Ends Zoroark EX with the trade ability to draw some extra cards, and you also have Pheasantipity EX, but that flip the script can only be used when your opponent's taking KOs, whereas Ends Zoroark EX's trade can be used whenever. Ethan's Typhlosion has a really good matchup against Gholdengo EX, which is a 2-prize Pokemon weak to fire, so you're really going to run through that deck with this. And it's also pretty good against Raging Bolt, which has a lot of 2-prizers on the board, especially the Teal Mask Ogerpon, which again is weak to fire. But Ethan's Typhlosion is going to struggle pretty hard against Grimmsnarl Froslass, against Gardevoir, against Dragapult decks, so that's why I don't have it much higher on my list today. The second honorable mention at 12th is going to be Crustle. Now, Crustle has the ability Mysterious Rock In. This is an ability we've seen plenty of times on plenty of Pokemon, essentially saying that you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon EX. And it also has a good typing, Grass, which hits Charizard EX for weakness and hits Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX for weakness, and a pretty decent attack in Superb Scissors, which does 120 and goes through effects. So even if you're swinging at something like a Cornerstone Ogerpon, which this deck also plays, you can actually go through their Cornerstone stance ability because you have the Superb Scissors that goes through effects. The point of this deck is going to be establishing a couple of Crustles with Luxurious Capes to boost their HP all the way up to 250, and just attack through your opponent's board with these Crustles that can't be hit by EX Pokemon. You have Monkey Dory's Adrenabrain to heal, but also increase the damage you're doing because you're moving damage from yourself to your opponent's Pokemon. And then you have the Pokevital A as the ace spec for 1 big heal per game. Crustle does really well into a lot of the top of the meta, having a favorable matchup into Grimmsnarl, a favorable matchup into Charizard decks, into most variants of Dragapult decks as well, but really faltering against Gardevoir, since Gardevoir has many options to get through the Crustle's ability, which keeps it on the lower end of today's list, since Gardevoir is a really strong deck and also fairly popular. And the last honorable mention of the video is going to be Charizard Dusknoir, which I've ranked as the 11th best deck in the current standard format. So Charizard Dusknoir is kind of not exactly a combo deck, but it's definitely a deck where you're looking to have very explosive turns, very high roll turns. You're trying to destroy your opponent's board with a combination of Dusclops and Dusknoir's Cursed Blasts abilities, which can knock themselves out. Dusclops puts 5 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon, Dusknoir does 13. And while that's adding damage to your opponent's board, it's also adding damage to your Burning Darkness, because Burning Darkness does 30 more for each prize card your opponent has taken, and you're forcing them to take prize cards with the Dusclops and the Dusknoir. So you might be able to knock out a basic Pokemon on the bench, maybe like a Dreepy or a Charmander or a Ralts with a Dusknoir, and then maybe you pop a Dusclops to add damage to the active, and then just like that, you've made your opponent take 2 prize cards. So now your Burning Darkness is doing 240, and then if you add that Dusclops damage, you're swinging 290 essentially. Defiance Band can bring that all the way up to 320 when your opponent is at less prize cards than you, and it also activates Counter Catcher. So the Dusk line and Charizard just work really well together, and Charizard's an incredibly powerful card. It sets itself up, it has high HP, and it does a lot of damage. As far as Charizard Dusknoir's matchups into the top decks, its best matchup is a pretty favorable one into Gholdengo, and then everything else kind of falls between like 40-60 to 55-45. This is a deck that does have a chance to win in just about any game in any matchup, but like I said, it does heavily rely on getting the right combinations of cards early enough to pop off and destroy your opponent's setup before they can really do anything. Now moving into the top 10, we have Joltik Box as number 10. This is a pretty straightforward and easy deck to play. You're going to lead the game off by using Joltik's Jolting Charge to accelerate energy to your Pokemon, and then you'll either use Iron Hands Amp You Very Much to knock out single prizers for 2 prizes, or you'll use Pikachu EX to one-shot 2 prize Pokemon for 2 prizes. So your goal is charge up your Pokemon with energy on the first attacking turn, and then take 2 prizes every turn after that. And typically, if you're able to race your opponent, you will be able to win and take 6 prizes before they can. However, this is a pretty linear deck. Your opponent knows what your strategy is as soon as you flip over your Joltik and start setting up your Iron Hands or Pikachu. And it is also a deck that's pretty susceptible to Iono or Unfair Stamp, because you don't have a ton of draw support available. Actually playing 0 supporters that draw you cards, and then you're really just left with Mew EX's Restart and Pheasantipity's Flip the Script. But if one of those are prized or your opponent chases those down and couples that with Hand Disruption, then this deck can become pretty uneventful pretty quickly. One of Joltik's best matchups is Marnie's Grimmsnarl Froslass, and that's a really strong deck, so it's a good deck to have a good matchup into. And it also tends to do okay into Stage 2 decks in general, typically needing some more setup. However, Dragapult can typically handle this deck okay, Gardevoir as well. Those are kind of like 50-50-ish matchups. Also having a good matchup into Gholdengo. Joltik Box's worst matchup is probably Raging Bolt, and Raging Bolt is quite popular, especially in the younger divisions, but still finds like a 10, 12, 15% meta share in major tournaments in the Masters division as well. Moving on to number 9, we've got the Flareon deck. Flareon using a combination of Flareon, Sylveon, Leafeon, some other Terra Pokemon. The list we'll look at today here actually omits Sylveon and is only using Flareon and Leafeon. So you have the Noctowl engine, the Jewel Seeker. As long as you have a Terra Pokemon in play, you could search for up to 2 trainer cards. That's incredibly powerful to get the exact 2 trainer cards you need. You have Sparkling Crystal as your ace spec, so that's going to help you out with what type of energy you need on your Pokemon and exactly how many energy you need on your Pokemon to attack. Like I was mentioning, you have a few Terra options. You've got the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon. Sob can be an annoying attack sometimes, but Torrential Pump is really where it's at here, doing 100 to the active and then 120 to one of the opponent's bench. So against a Stage 2 deck like Grimmsnarl, like Guardy, like Dragapult, if you can knock out both Dreepy, both Impidimp, both Ralts, all at one time with Wellspring, that can leave the opponent almost unable to get back into the game as long as you can follow that up with attacks in the following turns. Flareon EX's Burning Charge is really good at taking a small knockout or setting up damage while also charging up your next attacker at the same time, and also has the Carnelian attack, which does 280 damage. Then Leafeon is really going to shine against Grimmsnarl and against Charizard because they are weak to grass. I'd say other than the Gholdengo matchup, which is really quite good for Flareon, it doesn't have any absolutely incredible matchups. It is favored into Gholdengo, like I said, and also slightly favored into Grimmsnarl. But other than that, it has some slightly unfavored to unfavored matchups. Looking at the Gardevoir matchup. That's notably one of its worst matchups. Also really struggles into the Joltik Box matchup as well. Moving on to number 8, we've got Dragapult Charizard, and this deck archetype combines two of the strongest stage 2s that we have available to us, Dragapult EX and Charizard EX. Now, Dragapult EX does get some of its strength from the stage 1 Dracloak, because Dracloak has Recon Directive, which allows you to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one into your hand and one at the bottom of the deck. So Dragapult coming along with Dracloak is really quite important, because that's going to be part of the draw engine of this deck. And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, Charizard EX is just a very strong standalone card, having good typing to hit Gardevoir for weakness, having an ability that sets itself up with energy or can set up other Pokemon with energy, and an attack that scales in damage as the game goes on. A very important card to talk about here because of the current metagame is the Chi-Yu with Mega Fire of Envy. That Chi-Yu is going to make your Gholdengo matchup quite good, because this one-shots a Gholdengo after they've taken a KO, and it's also quite good to knock out Teal Mask Ogerpons versus Raging Bolt. Do note that if a Gholdengo has Rigid Band on it, your Chi-Yu no longer takes the one-shot KO, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. You might need to gust around and pick off a Gholdengo that doesn't have the Rigid Band on it, or if you happen to tech Jamming Tower into your list, that also takes care of that. Dragapult Charizard is a very 50-50 deck. It doesn't have fantastic matchups, and for the most part, it also doesn't have awful matchups. It just has a lot of winnable and losable matchups, kind of right down the middle of 50-50. So if that's the kind of deck that you like, where you don't have an inherent advantage or inherent disadvantage, this might be a great pick for you. It's just important to remember, a lot of people will look at 50-50 decks as being, okay, it doesn't have any bad matchups. You also want to remember it doesn't have many good matchups either. It can do well into Gholdengo, especially when you're playing the Chi-Yu. It can do well into Gardevoir, but those matchups are also very losable at the same time. So that's a big thing to keep in mind when thinking about Dragapult Charizard, is that it doesn't have great matchups, but it also doesn't have awful matchups. Moving on to my 7th best deck in the current standard format, we've got Straight Dragapult. Now, Straight Dragapult, it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles. It's pretty much just Dragapult and a couple of friends. You've got Badoo to item lock. You've got Maractus, which you can get some sneaky wins with corner, trapping something in the active. You have Blood Moon or Saloon as a backup attacker. And of course, we've got Monkey Dory, because Adrenabrain is just an insane ability, healing and essentially making damage onto your opponent's board. But Straight Dragapult is focusing on Dragapult EX as the main attacker, using Neo Upper Energy as the ace spec of choice here, so that it's easy to create a Dragapult in a pinch, even if you have 0 energy on board, or that you can bank this Neo Upper and then start building up energy on other Dragapults and maybe onto your Monkey Dories as well. Now, Straight Dragapult, I will say, is going to be slightly like Dragapult Charizard, where it doesn't have a lot of amazing matchups. It doesn't have a lot of awful matchups, except it does have good matchups into Charizard variants. Dragapult typically has a natural advantage against Charizard, because while Charizard is swinging into the active and has a linear line of damage, Dragapult can set up multi-turn knockouts or pick off the Charmanders, pick off the Pidgeys while you're setting up, pick off the Duskulls depending on the variant. So it has a positive into Charizard variants, but then it's negative into Gardevoir. It's really quite negative into Gardevoir, which is the main thing holding this archetype back. Next, at number 6, I've put Charizard Pidgeot here. So Charizard Pidgeot is a deck I really have a connection with. I top 8'd Orlando Regionals last season with Charizard Pidgeot, and some things have changed, some things have stayed the same. It was quite a long time ago, but Pidgeot and Charizard are just cards that it's very hard for them to not be good. Pidgeot searches for a card every turn. Charizard is ridiculously powerful in many ways, so it's hard to go wrong with this combination. Some cards to note in this deck list: that we have the Chi-Yu there to help against Gholdengo and Teal Mask Ogerpon. We've got Monkey Dory to combat Phantom Dive, or even just help against decks that aren't one-shotting us so that we can get extra damage onto their board with Adrenabrain. We've got the Mist Energy there. That can protect against Phantom Dive, but notably it can also protect against TM De-Evolution. That can be a very important one, especially against Grimmsnarl. And also against Grimmsnarl, that Picnic Basket can really help. Not only is it healing 30 from all of your Pokemon, but it also heals your opponent's Pokemon, which can actually be a good thing because then they have less damage to move around, potentially with Monkey Dory, especially if you're taking a one-shot on the active and not leaving any damage on the board. Charizard Pidgeot's best matchups against the top of the meta is going to be Gholdengo and then Gardevoir. I'd say Gardevoir is slightly favored, and then Gholdengo is just straight up favored. And then, of course, like I mentioned, Charizard variants tend to struggle into Dragapult. Not that bad, especially when you have the techs here, like Picnic Basket, Monkey Dory, Maximum Belt to get more damage in, Mist Energy to protect against an early Phantom Dive. But still notable, has a little bit of a disadvantage into the Dragapult decks. But pretty good into Gholdengo and Gardevoir, which are two good decks to be good into at this time. Next, at number 5, we've got Dragapult Dusknoir. And Dragapult Dusknoir these days, it's looking like the A-spec of choice amongst the top performing lists is just unanimously Neo Upper Energy, just like the straight Dragapult lists. Dragapult Dusknoir has interchanged its A-specs. You got Unfair Stamp, you got Sparkling Crystal, but Neo Upper Energy, just the ability to have a single energy attachment, provide everything you need for Phantom Dive, is really, really powerful, and it makes the deck more consistent and more reliable. Especially when you have the new Hilda supporter in this deck as well. You can search for an evolution Pokemon and an energy card. So if you need Neo Upper, it's got it for you. If you need the Luminous Energy for your Adrenabrain, it's got that too. So Hilda can be very, very strong for this deck, especially with the Neo Upper Energy in it. And of course, you're comboing your Phantom Dive damage with the Dusclops and Dusknoir damage, also activating Counter Catcher, also making your Ionos better when you're forcing your opponent to take prize cards. So similar to the Charizard Dusknoir variant, but actually even more so, you can really destroy boards. You can Dusclop something else, knock out 3 things all at once. Because of the spread damage of Phantom Dive, this is even more of a capability and more of a commonplace strategy and thing that happens, even more so than in the Charizard Dusknoir variant. Dragapult Dusknoir can struggle against some of the top of the meta, having an unfavored Guardy matchup, a slightly unfavored Gholdengo matchup, a pretty even Raging Bolt matchup, and then a pretty even Grimmsnarl matchup as well. So against the top of the field, it doesn't really have favored matchups too much, but of course picks that up with some favored matchups into the Charizard variants and into some of the lower rung decks like Ethan's Typhlosion. Next, at number 4, I have Raging Bolt Ogerpon with the Noctowls. There are some builds that don't run the Noctowls, or they just run like a 1/1 Noctowl, but I do think the Noctowl is a ridiculous card. It's really, really hard to not play Noctowl when you're already playing the Terra Pokemon that go along with activating its ability. So Raging Bolt, we've talked about it and how its matchups are into other decks, but I haven't actually looked at Raging Bolt yet in this video. Bellowing Thunder does 70 damage for each energy you discard from your board, and you can get a lot of energy on the board with Sada, with Crispin, with Teal Mask Ogerpon's Teal Dance ability. You also have the baby Raging Bolt with Thunderburst Storm, which can snipe 30 times the amount of energy on it. So if you have 3 energy, you can snipe 90, and that's going to knock out any of the basics of the stage 2 decks while they're still in the early stages of building up their board. So that's really good for that use. And then you have the Cornerstone Ogerpon EX in here, which is not always in Raging Bolt, but it's being used here because it can wall out Gholdengo and it can wall out Charizard. So it can be used into both of those matchups. So Raging Bolt is a strong deck, and its strength, consistency, aggression can win games on its own because you can start taking prize cards and dismantling your opponent's setup before they even really get into the game. However, decks that are really good at playing from behind, like Gardevoir, are the bane of Raging Bolt's existence. So Gardevoir, and also much farther down on the list, but Ethan's Typhlosion, both of these decks are really bad matchups for Raging Bolt. And then Raging Bolt finds some slightly favored matchups into Grimmsnarl, into Gholdengo, and also a good matchup into Joltik Box. Next, as my number 3 deck, we've got Gholdengo. So Gholdengo actually gained a huge buff from the new black and white set. 2 very important cards for Gholdengo. The first being Genesect EX with the ability Metallic Signal that can search for up to 2 Metal Evolution Pokemon. And then Air Balloon, which gives the Pokemon -2 retreat cost. The air balloon is so big for Gholdengo because you can use your active coin bonus to draw 2, attach air balloon, then retreat into the next Gholdengo and use that coin bonus for 2 as well. So Gholdengo EX is a powerful card, and this is a powerful deck because Gholdengo EX has the draw built into it with coin bonus, and then it also has Make It Rain, which is a 1 energy attack that can do essentially infinite damage. So it has a lot of good stuff all on one card, and it's a stage 1, and we have Genesect EX that can search for double Gholdengo, so we don't even have to run Ultra Balls in the list anymore. And that makes some room to have things like the 1/1 Caesar and the Ace Nullifier Genesect to turn off the opponent's Ace specs. Gholdengo is typically going to have a pretty good time into stage 2 decks like Marnie's Grimmsnarl, like Gardevoir, and like Dragapult variants. Grimmsnarl can definitely combat Gholdengo with damage spread and TM Devo and some well-positioned Badoo, but it's finding favor into stage 2 decks in general, other than the Charizards, and then also having a slightly unfavored into Joltik Box and into Raging Bolt. But the consistency of Gholdengo has made it so even its bad matchups are not that bad anymore. Next at number 2, I have Gardy, and the list we're going to look at here is including a 1/1 line of the new Jellicent EX. The new Jellicent EX also comes with the basic Frillish. Frillish has the Oceanic Gloom to do 20 and your opponent can't play items. And then Jellicent has the ability that says your opponent can't play items or tools, and it has an attack that does 80 or can go all the way up to 160 if you attach enough energies to it. I don't think that the full Jellicent build of Gardevoir is the way to go. It's taking up too many deck spots for not enough payoff. However, the Frillish is actually better than Badoo a lot of times because it has more HP. And it also damages Gholdengo, notably, whereas Badoo does 0 damage to Gholdengo because of the grass resistance. And if you're playing Frillish, why not play the 1 Jellicent as well, because there are some positions that Jellicent can be really good in. However, Gardevoir EX is going to, the core of the deck is going to accelerate energy with Gardevoir Psychic Embrace onto Pokemon like Drifloon and Screamtail and Lily's Clefairy, Mew EX, sometimes even Gardevoir or Munkidori or part of the Jellicent line, and puts damage on your Pokemon as you accelerate these energies. And that is why Munkidori is so important. Munkidori is almost as core to this deck as Gardevoir itself is at this point, because you can use your Adrenabrains to move that damage that you purposely generate on your board and move it to wherever you like. Whether that's going to clean up a KO, set up a knockout for later, or maybe it's going towards the thing that you're trying to KO this turn. Gardevoir's best matchups are Raging Bolt and Dragapult variants, and it definitely struggles into Grimmsnarl and into Gholdengo. And finally, the deck that I'm ranking as first today is Marnie's Grimmsnarl Froslass. Of course, we've had all 3 types of rankings throughout today's video. For Grimmsnarl, I've ranked it as number 1, but Popularity Online has it ranked at number 2, and Amount of Top 8s also has it ranked at number 2. So not too far off from where I'm at, and I've used these kind of rankings today to show the viewers This is where I think a deck is, but if you want a more statistical approach, you can also see how popular it is in online tournaments and how successful it is in online tournaments to kind of gauge that compared to my personal rankings. But Marnie's Grimmsnarl Froslass, why is this my number one? Well, we have a lot of things going for it. We've got good use of Monkey Dory, already playing Dark Energy as our main energy type, the only energy type in here. And you can accelerate energies to Grimmsnarl with the Punk Up ability, so then your manual attachments can be saved for Monkey Dory, so you can set up all those Adrenabrains. Then you have Frostlass's Freezing Shroud, which generates damage on your own board to move with Adrenabrain, but also damages your opponent's board. And this is really, really good for TM Devo plays. I know this list here is only using the one TM Devo, but I think we could see lists going back up to 2 TM Devos being good against stage 2 decks and being good against Gholdengo. And then, of course, Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX's attack is Shadow Bullet, doing 180 and 30 to one of the benched Pokemon. Marnie's Grimmsnarl's best matchup is into Gardevoir, and Gardevoir is probably the strongest deck in the format in terms of its ceiling of power and what the deck can do and what the deck can come back from. But Grimmsnarl has quite a good matchup into it. Grimmsnarl is unfavored into Joltik Box for sure. Can be unfavored into Raging Bolt, but I think that matchup's actually closer than people think. And then it's typically slightly favored into the other stage 2 decks like Dragapult and Charizard, so it's just got a really, really well-rounded matchup spread for it in this format. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video on the best decks in August 2025 for the Pokemon TCG. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.